My name is Natalia Rodriguez, and I'm 26 years old. What happened when my sister Carmen typed my name into Google last Thursday is something that completely shattered her world in the span of 30 seconds. Picture this, her sitting at her laptop, probably expecting to find nothing more than my old college photos, or maybe my LinkedIn profile, only to freeze completely as article after article filled her screen. The same sister who had humiliated me just 24 hours earlier at our family barbecue, laughing as she told everyone that my little photography hobby was just a cute way for me to avoid getting a real job. But here's what Carmen discovered when she hit that search button. My little hobby wasn't just some weekend pastime with a camera. Those Google results showed magazine covers, celebrity portraits, and news articles about the photographer who'd just signed a $3.20 million contract with Vogue. The same photographer who'd been quietly building an international reputation while her family dismissed her work as an expensive way to avoid growing up. And the look on Carmen's face when she realized she'd been mocking one of the most sought-after photographers in the fashion industry? I wish I could have seen it. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about hidden talents being revealed at exactly the right moment. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes the most extraordinary careers look like hobbies to people who don't know how to recognize real success. Let me take you back to our family barbecue last Sunday, the gathering that started this whole revelation. It was my cousin Miguel's engagement celebration, and the entire extended Rodriguez family had descended on my aunt's backyard. All 43 of us crammed into her modest space, folding tables covered in checkered tablecloths, the smell of carne asada filling the air. The usual crowd, parents, grandparents, cousins, siblings, and their significant others, all catching up on each other's lives and sharing updates about careers, relationships, and achievements. I'd actually been reluctant to attend because I'd just returned from a demanding 3-week shoot in Milan for Italian Vogue, a campaign featuring emerging sustainable fashion designers that had pushed me creatively and physically. I was still recovering from jet lag and the intense schedule, but family obligations in our household weren't optional. Missing Miguel's engagement party would have generated weeks of guilt trips from various relatives. I'd brought my camera, as I always did to family events, a Nikon Z9 mirrorless that had cost more than Carmen's monthly salary, but was essential for the kind of high-resolution work my clients demanded. Not for work this time, just to capture candid moments of people I loved, the kind of authentic family moments that never made it into my commercial portfolio but meant everything to me personally. But Carmen, who'd been drinking wine since arriving and clearly felt emboldened by the family audience, apparently saw my professional-grade equipment as an opportunity for entertainment at my expense. "Oh look everyone," she announced loudly as I was photographing my grandmother with the newest great-grandchild, using natural light techniques I'd perfected during portrait sessions with A-list actors. Natalia brought her expensive camera to another family event. Still playing photographer, I see. The conversation around the patio table paused. Carmen had that tone in her voice, the one that meant she was about to turn someone into the centerpiece of her attention, usually not in a good way. I recognized it from childhood when she'd use family gatherings to highlight my perceived failures or shortcomings for everyone's amusement. "It's not playing," I said quietly, continuing to adjust my camera settings. "I'm just taking some family photos. Right, your little hobby?" Carmen continued, her voice carrying across the yard as more relatives turned to listen. "Tell everyone how much that camera cost, Natalia." "What was it? Like $5,000? Carmen, leave her alone," our cousin Sophia said, but Carmen was just getting started. No, I think everyone should know about Natalia's expensive hobby," Carmen continued, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass, while more relatives turned to watch the unfolding spectacle. "She's been pursuing photography for what, 5 years now? Instead of getting a real job like the rest of us responsible adults." What Carmen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that those 5 years represented one of the most intense career-building periods imaginable. 5 years of 16-hour days, 7-day work weeks, networking events where I was often the youngest photographer in rooms full of industry veterans. 5 years of saying no to vacations, social events, and even some family gatherings, because I was building something extraordinary while they assumed I was playing with expensive toys. I felt my cheeks burning as more family members turned their attention to our conversation. This was exactly the kind of public attention I'd always tried to avoid, not because I was ashamed of my work, because I'd learned over the years that explaining my career to people who couldn't see past their assumptions was usually pointless and often painful. Photography can be a real career, Miguel said diplomatically, trying to diffuse the growing tension. His fiancée Lisa nodded supportively. She worked in graphic design and understood creative industries better than most of our relatives. Carmen laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Sure, for people who actually make money at it. But Natalia just takes pretty pictures as a hobby. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with hobbies, but let's call it what it is instead of pretending it's some serious career. I do make money from photography, I said, still focused on my camera rather than the thick, growing audience around us. Oh really? How much? Carmen challenged, her voice getting louder as she sensed she had the room's attention. Because from what I can see, you're still living in that tiny apartment, still driving that old Honda, still asking mom and dad for help with bills sometimes. That doesn't sound like someone making real money from photography. The silence that followed was excruciating. She'd just aired my financial business in front of our entire extended family, making assumptions about my income based on my lifestyle choices, without understanding any of the context behind those decisions. What she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I kept my living expenses low by choice, not necessity. The tiny apartment was actually a converted loft in the arts district that I'd chosen because it had perfect natural light for portfolio work, and was close to the studios where I did most of my commercial shoots. The Honda was reliable transportation that didn't draw attention when I needed to blend into crowds during documentary work. As for asking our parents for help with bills, that had happened exactly twice in 5 years, both times when major equipment purchases had temporarily strained my cash flow before client payments came through. But Carmen had somehow transformed those isolated incidents into evidence of chronic financial instability. Carmen, that's enough, our mother said sharply from across the patio, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. But the damage was done. I could see the expressions on my relatives' faces, a mixture of pity and disappointment as they processed Carmen's revelation about my supposed financial struggles. I'm just saying, Carmen continued, gesturing with her wine glass, we all support Natalia's creative interests, but maybe it's time to think about a backup plan. You can't live off taking pretty pictures forever. Pretty pictures. 5 years of building a career, establishing relationships with clients, developing a signature style that had gotten attention from major publications, and she called it taking pretty pictures. What about you, Carmen? Our Uncle Robert? Oh, asked clearly, trying to change the subject. How's the marketing job going? Carmen straightened up, her entire demeanor shifting as the conversation turned to her career. It's going amazing, actually. I just got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, and I'm working on campaigns for some really big clients. Real corporate work, you know. Steady income, benefits, career advancement opportunities, all the things that come with a traditional career path. The contrast was intentional and obvious. Carmen's real career versus my hobby. Her steady income versus my presumed financial instability. Her professional advancement versus my creative pursuits that she viewed as an extended adolescence. What made the comparison even more painful was that Carmen's promotion, while legitimate, was to a mid-level position at a regional marketing firm handling local restaurant chains and car dealerships. Respectable work certainly, but hardly the glamorous corporate success she was presenting it as. Meanwhile, my last client had been Beyoncé's personal team for a private photo shoot, but I couldn't mention that without sounding defensive or boastful in this context. I spent the rest of the barbecue taking photos and staying out of conversations, watching Carmen hold court about her promotion and her impressive client list, while family members offered congratulations and asked follow-up questions about her career trajectory. Every so often, someone would ask about my photography, but the questions felt perfunctory after Carmen's public dismissal of my work, polite inquiries that expected brief, humble responses before the conversation could move on to more substantive topics. When I got home that evening, I found myself looking through the photos I'd taken, not the family barbecue shots, which had turned out beautifully despite the emotional turmoil of the day, but my professional portfolio. The magazine covers, the celebrity portraits, the fashion campaigns that had been featured in international publications. I pulled up my client folder on my laptop and scrolled through contracts and correspondence that told a completely different story than the one Carmen had presented to our family. There was the email from Annie Leibovitz's team, praising my work and asking if I'd be interested in collaborating on an upcoming project. The contract from Harper's Bazaar for a six-figure exclusive editorial series. The thank you note from Rihanna's publicist after I'd shot her latest campaign. The invitation to exhibit my work at the Whitney Museum. The letter from the World Press Photo Foundation congratulating me on my award. I thought about calling Carmen, about sending her links to my published work, about correcting the assumptions she'd made in front of everyone. But I had tried that approach before over the years, only to have my achievements minimized or dismissed as lucky breaks rather than earned success. You know someone who knows someone, she'd said when I mentioned photographing a Grammy winner. Right place, right time, she'd commented when I'd tried to share news about a magazine cover. Instead, I decided to let her discover the truth on her own, when she was curious enough to look beyond her assumptions. The next morning, I posted something I'd never shared on my personal social media before. A photo of myself on set during a recent Vogue shoot, tagged with the magazine's official account, and captioned simply, "Grateful for another amazing collabora. Ayan. I didn't tag Carmen or any family members. I didn't make any direct references to the barbecue conversation. I just shared one small glimpse of my professional reality and let the algorithms do the rest. What I didn't expect was how quickly the discovery would happen. Carmen called me at 11:47 a.m., less than 2 hours after I'd posted the photo. Natalia, her voice was different, smaller somehow, with an uncertainty I'd never heard from Carmen before. "Can we talk? About what? About your work, your photography." She paused, and I could hear her breathing. "I need to understand something." "My little hobby, you mean?" I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. The pause that followed was loaded with everything she'd just learned. "I Googled your name this morning. Oh, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ever explain what you actually do?" I sat down on my couch, looking around my tiny apartment, the same space I'd chosen because I preferred spending money on equipment and travel rather than expensive rent, not because I Eldon afford something bigger. The morning light streaming through my north-facing windows was perfect for editing, one of the reasons I'd specifically chosen this loft. I tried to explain Carmen. For years. Every time I mentioned a client or a publication or a project, you and everyone else would minimize it or change the subject. Eventually I stopped trying. But Vogue? National Geographic? Harper's Bazaar? Natalia, these are huge publications. I read these magazines. I've probably seen your work without realizing it was yours. I know. The articles about your work, there are dozens of them. You've photographed celebrities I recognize. You've won awards. There's an entire Wikipedia page about your career." Her voice was getting higher, more incredulous with each revelation. "The Smithsonian has some of your photographs in their permanent collection? For my documentary series on climate change refugees, that was 3 years ago." "I know that too. The contract they mention in Forbes, is that real? $3.2 million, for a 3-year exclusive partnership, yes." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. "Carmen? Are you still there?" "I'm here. I'm trying to understand how we didn't know." "How I didn't know?" "Because you decided what my work was without ever asking for details. Because you assumed that if I wasn't living like a stereotypical successful person, I couldn't actually be successful. Because it was easier to dismiss my career as a hobby than to admit you didn't understand it." "Natalia, I'm so sorry." "For which part? For calling my work a hobby? For questioning my income? In front of the entire family? For suggesting I needed a backup plan from the career that's actually more successful than yours? For all of it? For everything? I had no idea. You had no idea because you never looked. You never asked detailed questions about my work. You never showed interest in my clients or my projects or my achievements. You just saw camera equipment and assumed I was playing with expensive toys. But you never corrected me when I said you were just taking pretty pictures. Carmen, I've been published in magazines you read. I've photographed actors whose movies you watch. I've done campaigns for brands you buy from. The information was always available if you'd cared enough to look for it." Another long pause. "Can you forgive me?" "I can forgive you. But Carmen, this isn't just about apologies. This is about how you treated me in front of our entire family. About assumptions you made about my life and my choices without knowing the facts. I know. I was wrong about everything. You weren't just wrong, you were publicly wrong. You made me look like a failure in front of people whose opinions matter to me. What can I do to make it right? I thought about that question. What could make it right? Another family gathering where she corrected the record? A social media post acknowledging her mistake? A conversation with our parents explaining what she'd learned? For now, just start seeing me differently. Start asking about my work instead of dismissing it. Start treating my career with the same respect you expect for yours. I will. Natalia, I promise I will. But I knew promises were easy. The real test would be how she acted the next time we were around family, whether she'd defend my career as readily as she'd dismissed it. If you've ever had a family member mock your creative work without understanding its value, type more than a hobby in the comments. What comes next shows exactly how powerful it can be when people realize they've been completely wrong about someone's success. The family group chat exploded that afternoon. It started when Carmen shared one of the articles about my Vogue partnership, accompanied by a message that must have taken her considerable effort to write. I need to share something with everyone. Yesterday at Miguel's barbecue, I made some very ignorant comments about Natalia's photography career. I called it a hobby and suggested she wasn't making real money from it. I was completely wrong. Natalia is an internationally recognized photographer who's worked with major magazines and celebrities. She just signed a multi-million-dollar contract with Vogue. I owe her a huge apology, and I owe all of you an explanation for my behavior. The responses came quickly. Mom, what? Natalia, is this true? Dad, $3 million? From photography? Aunt Maria, knew she was talented, but I had no idea it was this serious. Uncle Roberto, why didn't we know about this? Cousin Sophia, Natalia, these photos are incredible. You're famous. Miguel, this is amazing. We should have been celebrating your success all along. And then, the question I'd been expecting, Grandma Carmen, Mia, why didn't you tell us about your achievements? I stared at that message for a long time before responding. How do you explain years of having your work dismissed, your achievements minimized, your career treated as a phase you'd eventually grow out of? Finally, I typed, I tried to share my success over the years, but it was often misunderstood or dismissed as luck rather than hard work. I learned it was easier to let my work speak for itself rather than try to convince people who weren't ready to see it. The conversation that followed was unlike any our family had ever had. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know everything. How I'd built my career, which celebrities I'd worked with, what my typical day looked like, how I'd developed my signature style. But the most meaningful response came from my father. Natalia, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm sorry we didn't support you better. I think I speak for the whole family when I say we failed to see how successful you'd become. Carmen called me again that evening. The family chat, she said without preamble. I saw it. Everyone's talking about your work now. Mom called me crying, saying she felt terrible about not knowing how successful you were. It's not about them not knowing. It's about them not being curious enough to find out. That's fair. Natalia, can I ask you something? Why do you live so simply? If you're making this kind of money, why the small apartment, the old car, the modest lifestyle? It was a question I'd expected, because I don't measure success by possessions. I spend my money on experiences, equipment, travel for shoots, investing in my business. I don't need a mansion or a luxury car to validate my achievements. But people assume wrong. That's their problem. Not mine. I assumed wrong. You did. And you made those assumptions publicly, which was hurtful and unfair. I know. Natalia, is there anything I can do to make up for yesterday? I thought about her question. Carmen, I don't need you to make up for anything. But I do need you to understand that your assumptions about success are limited. Not everyone who achieves financial success displays it the same way. And creative careers can be just as valuable and profitable as traditional corporate jobs. I understand that now. Do you? Because it's easy to understand when you're looking at magazine covers and million-dollar contracts. But what about the years before those achievements were visible? Would you have supported my work then, when it really was just potential rather than proven success? The question hung between us. I knew the answer, and I suspected Carmen did too. I want to say yes, she said finally. But honestly, probably not. I would have seen the camera equipment and the irregular income and the unconventional schedule. and I would have worried about your future. At least you're honest. I'm trying to be. Natalia, I realize now that I've been measuring everyone's success by my own narrow definition. Corporate job, steady paycheck, traditional career progression. I never considered that there might be other ways to build a meaningful, profitable career. There are many ways. I know that now. And I promise will remember it going forward. 3 weeks later, Carmen did something that surprised me. She organized a family dinner specifically to celebrate my recent achievements, not as an apology event, but as a genuine celebration of my success. She'd contacted everyone who'd been at the barbecue and some who hadn't, explaining what she'd learned and insisting that the family needed to properly acknowledge my career. We should have been supporting Natalia all along, she announced to the gathered relatives as we sat around my parents' extended dining room table. Instead of waiting for her to prove herself according to our limited understanding of success, we should have been celebrating her talent and her hard work from the beginning. The dinner felt surreal. For the first time in my adult life, I was the center of positive family attention for my professional achievements. Carmen had printed out some of my magazine covers and awards articles, creating an informal display that she'd set up near the entrance so people could see my work as they arrived. During that dinner, I shared stories about my career that I'd never felt comfortable telling before. The time I'd accidentally photographed a celebrity's secret engagement while shooting street fashion, and had to navigate the ethical implications. The challenge of working in war zones for my documentary series, where getting the shot sometimes meant risking personal safety. The satisfaction of seeing my vision come to life in major publications, knowing that millions of people around the world would see my interpretation of beauty, tragedy, or truth. For the first time, my family listened with genuine interest and pride rather than polite tolerance. They asked follow-up questions, wanted to see more of my work, and expressed amazement at the scope and recognition of my career. Uncle Roberto, who worked in construction, was particularly fascinated by the technical aspects of my equipment and the business side of creative work. So when you do a shoot for Vogue, how many people are on the team? How long does it take to set up those elaborate fashion photos? Aunt Maria wanted to understand the artistic process. How do you decide what story you want to tell with a photograph? When you're looking through your camera, what are you thinking about? My father, who had always been skeptical of creative careers, asked about the financial stability and growth potential. Is this sustainable long-term? Can you build security in a field that seems so unpredictable? These were the kinds of thoughtful, detailed questions I'd been hoping for throughout my career, questions that showed genuine curiosity about my work rather than polite dismiss. All of it. But the most significant change was in how Carmen talked about her own career and success in general. Instead of positioning herself as the family's example of professional success, she started acknowledging that success could look many different ways and that she'd been measuring everyone's achievements by an unfairly narrow standard. I have a stable corporate job that I enjoy, she said when our cousin Anna asked about her work during the dinner. But Natalia has built something much more impressive, an international reputation in a highly competitive creative field. Different paths, but both valid forms of success. I wish I'd understood that sooner. She also started being more honest about her own career progression. Senior marketing coordinator sounds impressive, she admitted to me privately after dinner, but you've probably made more money from a single magazine shoot than I'll make all year. I was defensive about my achievements because deep down, I was intimidated by what you'd accomplished. That admission meant more to me than any of the family celebration or the apologies. Carmen's dismissal of my work hadn't just been ignorance. It had been a defensive reaction to feeling insecure about her own career path when compared to mine. 6 months later, when my work was featured on the cover of Time magazine for a series about climate change, Carmen was the first person to call me with congratulations. I saw the cover at the grocery store, she said, her voice full of genuine excitement. I bought 5 copies and I've been showing everyone. The cashier, other customers, even my coworkers. I'm so proud to be your sister. Thank you, Carmen. That means a lot. Can I ask you something? Do you remember when I called your work a hobby at Miguel's barbecue? I remember. I think about that day a lot. How wrong I was, how hurtful my comments must have been, but also how patient you were with me. You could have embarrassed me right there by showing everyone your Wikipedia page or your magazine covers on your phone. Why didn't you? I thought about her question, remembering the anger and hurt I'd felt that day, the temptation to defend myself publicly and dramatically. Because humiliating you wouldn't have changed your perspective, it would have just made you defensive and resentful. Google your name. By letting the information be available when you were curious enough to look for it. When you were ready to question your assumptions instead of just defending them. That was actually brilliant. And much kinder than I deserved after what I said. Carmen, you're my sister. I didn't want to embarrass you in front of the family. I wanted you to understand me and see my work for what it really was. The relationship between Carmen and me is stronger now than it's ever been. She asks about my projects with genuine interest, celebrates my achievements without reservation, and has become one of my biggest supporters within the family. But more importantly, she's changed how she talks. About success in general. When younger cousins mention creative interests or unconventional career goals, Carmen is now the one encouraging them to pursue their passions, rather than dismissing them as impractical. I learned the hard way, she told our teenage cousin Anna, who wants to study film, that traditional career paths aren't the only ones that lead to success. Follow your passion, work hard, and don't let anyone convince you that creative careers are less valuable than corporate ones. The Google search that revealed my success wasn't really about the search results, it was about the moment Carmen realized she'd been looking at my life through the wrong lens entirely. The expensive camera equipment wasn't a frivolous hobby purchase, it was professional. Tools. The modest lifestyle wasn't evidence of financial struggle, it was a choice about how to allocate resources. The irregular schedule wasn't avoiding responsibility, it was the reality of a creative career. Sometimes people need to see success in terms they understand, magazine covers, dollar amounts, mainstream recognition, before they can appreciate the work that creates that success. And sometimes the most powerful way to change someone's perspective is to let them discover their mistake on their own, when they're ready to see it clearly. The sister who mocked my little hobby is now my biggest advocate. The family who worried about my backup plan now celebrates my achievements. And the photographer who was dismissed as an impractical dreamer is now recognized as exactly what she always was, a professional building something extraordinary, one frame at a time. My hobby turned out to be worth more than most people's careers. But the real victory wasn't the financial success or the magazine covers, it was finally being seen and valued by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. What creative pursuit has your family dismissed as just a hobby? What success have you built that others don't understand? Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had your creative work minimized by people who couldn't see its value, you're not alone. Comment more than a hobby if you believe creative careers deserve the same respect as traditional ones. Share this story with someone who needs to know that passion combined with skill and dedication can lead to extraordinary success. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories about creative careers, family dynamics, and the moment when hidden success becomes impossible to ignore. I'd love to know, should creative professionals have to prove their success with mainstream recognition, or should families support their work regardless? Let me know in the comments. Remember, your creative work has value whether or not others can see it yet. Keep building, keep creating, and let your achievements speak for themselves when the world is ready to listen.